G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. About to go for a ride to town, and I think on the one hand we will test the creaky leather motorbike jacket. On the other hand, I'll see how good the bike is when it's been charged this morning while the sun was up, had a brief rest and then off to town. And then the gripping hand. It's now 10 days, 11 days since the last instalment, the previous instalment in the Trumpocalypse Chronicles. So I guess we'll talk about what's been going on diagonally across the Pacific Ocean. 22 to 4, so I've missed the bread shop. Just have to eat what there is in the supermarket today. Never mind. Okay. That we should be recording. So, as I recall it, 10 or 11 days ago I was singing the Mary Poppins song about the stupid, callous, fragile, racist, sexist, Nazi POTUS. And yeah, well, he's gone and done all sorts of things that were foretold in that previous video. He's outed himself as being 100% aligned with the foreign policy of the Kremlin in Moscow. He hasn't so much as said that he's working for Putin, but the Russian foreign minister has stated that the United States is now behaving 100% in accordance with their visions, which is putting it in exactly as many words as anything anybody could imagine. The reason the roads are chewed up as it is because we had something like 70 millimetres of rain over about 5 or 6 days, and this road here is mostly clay. So anyway, the Yanks have said that there's no chance of Ukraine joining NATO, there's no chance of an American guarantee of whatever peace proposal they come up with. They want Ukraine to give about half its mineral resources to America. Mind you, these mineral resources are going to take 10 years to start digging the hole and building the refinery for. But that doesn't appear to worry Trump. The Ukrainians appear to have figured out that the way the economic situation is running at the moment, Russia can't actually afford for the war to stop. Because if the war stops, all those soldiers who are out there getting chewed up in the meat grinder come home to be unemployed, disgruntled, pissed off veterans. And he gets exactly what happened when the Soviets got chased out of Afghanistan. So he sort of wants the war to keep going along with ceasefires and breaks into ceasefire and keep the pressure on, sort of thing, unless and until Ukraine surrenders totally. But at the same time, Russia's running out of tanks and it's running out of soldiers. And it's always pretty cheap to fight a guerrilla war when you're in occupied territory. So I don't think there's any military solution that's going to turn out in Moscow's favour. However, it's sort of beyond everybody's calculation that in the last 10 days, Germany has invited France to station independent French aeroplane compatible French nuclear tactical and strategic missiles on German bases so that NATO can have an independent nuclear deterrent against Russia, which is not dependent on the USA. Because Yeah, there's a lot of countries in NATO which have got nuclear weapons based there, and some of them are tactically operable by the host country's military, but they're all got a kill switch in Washington. There may not be a literal software program to switch off the computers in the F-35s, more or less definitely not in the F-18s or the Super Hornets, but the F-35 was sufficiently debatable that I've heard a couple of experts discussing that over 15 or 20 minutes, come to the conclusion that there's probably no actual software embedded into it that you can switch it off from Washington, but it's not going to take too long before there's not enough consumable spare parts on hand to keep operating it. And the other thing is the F-35 is a bit like a modern mobile phone where several times a month it pings at you and tells you to switch everything off and sit down and watch while it updates itself. A lot of those updates can be switched off or disabled. So yeah, NATO's seriously contemplating life with no USA in the pot. A whole bunch of people were thinking that all the talk about annexing Greenland and making Canada become the 51st state was just comic relief, nothing real, nothing you have to worry about. However, when Trump slapped his 25% tax on Canada, the governor of Ontario in Canada slapped a 25% tax on the electricity going to New York City. Or maybe it was, yeah, I think it was New York City. Trumpy sort of backed down really bloody fast because he knows he hasn't quite got the head of public opinion behind him necessary to roar across the border and annex the power station that's proven a bit balky and reluctant to supply power to the God-fearing righteous Americans who are destined to win because fate's on their side. You ask any prosperity gospel evangelist. So, part of the point is that the Canadians are terribly, deeply angry at all the talk about being made part of Greater America. Let these fellas go past. Much more restful than riding on the fog line through the rails. Now I've been myself thinking that part of the reason for carrying on as if annexing Canada was anything real could be to distract the media from paying attention to what's actually going on in the American government administration, which is being gutted, torn to pieces, ripped apart. Honestly, there's a whole bunch of people who this last couple of days are starting to say things that I've been saying in these Trumpocalypse Chronicles for 2 or 3 months. The only coherent, rational, reasonable explanation for why Trump is doing exactly what he's doing, it is so brilliantly well planned and coordinated to be wreaking unfixable damage on the American system, because everything's sort of running on just-in-time delivery of spare parts and components for everything. Every investor has got bills and mortgages and loans to pay interest on. There's not enough resilience and inertia in the systems that he is basically throwing bloody broomsticks across the spokes of their wheels, chucking handfuls of nuts and bolts into the gearbox while it's working. The amount of social unrest and damage and anger in a society where everybody's been raised to believe that they can do whatever they bloody want, and with 330 million individuals, they've got something like 420 million firearms. On top of all that, perhaps the most bloody disturbing thing I've run across, it was a post on the community wall by Midas Touch Network. And one of their better lawyers has unearthed the fact that the bloke who started Blackwater Security, the outfit which famously made a hell of a mess of America's reputation in Iraq when a convoy of their Humvees and open back trucks went through a market and they killed 17 local civilians with machine gun fire, attempting to defend the nature of their fantasy reality from imaginary insurgents that weren't anywhere near the situation. They'd been hired by Halliburton under a contract let by George W. Bush to do what his father knew better than doing, which was try and occupy Iraq after going in there and smashing the military and firing off all your unwanted World War II to the end of the Cold War stockpiled ammunition, ready to fight Russia, fight the Soviet Union with. Everybody in NATO had bloody warehouses full of weapons and munitions. Just when everyone was expecting a peace dividend, all of a sudden, bloody Madeleine Albright went over to Iraq, told Sadman who's insane that the US was not interested in getting involved in internecine border disputes among America's Arab client states. Which Sadman who's insane interpreted as being an absolute green light to go over the border and see some oil wells in Kuwait that he reckons should ought to be his. And therefore we had the first Iraq War, and that broke the Middle East. And then 10 years later, 2 aeroplanes hit 2 buildings in New York and 3 buildings fell down. Something hit the Pentagon and the forever war kicked off and ran for 20 bloody years, generating military contracts that ensured ongoing salaries and wages for tens or hundreds of thousands of workers in America, and ongoing profits and dividends for shareholders of the companies making everything that was sold to the Department of Defense. And the US Department of Defense, let us not forget, is the largest single organisation emitter of atmospheric fossil carbon on an industrial scale. No other single organisation owns and operates more great big ocean-going ships, more aircraft, more heavy road vehicles, more heavy off-road vehicles, consumes more manufactured products used by made by burning fossil fuels. Basically, that Pete Hegsworth is in command of the largest shitter in the sky on the planet, the biggest polluter. And Trump's rampant mismanagement, or perhaps coherently well thought out sabotage, conducted by a Quisling loyal to America's oldest enemy, it's just ripping the whole place apart. Anyway, I was talking about Blackwater. Apparently the head of Blackwater has made an application to Trump to consider his offer of 10,000 mercenaries loyal to a contract to himself. Sounds like Trumpism, doesn't it? Anyway, these 10,000, which can be rapidly upscaled to 50,000, mercenaries loyal to Blackwater are to be guards at the concentration camps to round up the 12.5 million undocumented immigrants who Trump wants to throw out of the country before the next midterm. And to get them out of the place, head of Blackwater, which of course it's been renamed 2 or 3 times since they, displaced themselves in Iraq. Head of Blackwater is offering a fleet of 100 civilian registered commercial aircraft to haul away the 12.6 million undocumented immigrants and undesirable citizens who Donnie wants to deport. Meanwhile, the Congress and the Senate have declined to call Trump in and question them about any of the apparently illegal executive orders which are firing anybody who's got any skill or experience or subject matter expertise in all the government departments in the US civil service. And prosecutors who know what they're doing are refusing to prosecute. Therefore, again, anybody with any skill, experience or subject matter expertise is being replaced by some gutless, moronic, incompetent, half-witted, quote, politically reliable lackey whose one and only skill is to kiss up and kick down and lick Donald Trump's hemorrhoids. Finally, here in Australia, our Prime Minister, Anthony of the Albanese variety, he's found it within himself to condemn the US for imposing the 25% tariff on Australian steel and aluminium, which he had been asking them not to do because last time they gave Australia an exemption. And he did point out that Australian steel is imported by America and used in the construction industry, and there was a whole bunch of people who were planning to rebuild their 15,000 houses burnt out around Los Angeles who are now going to be slugged with a 25% increase in the cost of construction steel. You know, for like prefabricated, bolt together, steel frame, galvanised houses, because they haven't got enough trees to cut them up into useful timber anymore, and timber bloody burns in bushfires anyway. So Albanese's got a lot of public approval for starting to stand up to Trump. There was a lot of people wanting to stand up earlier. Meanwhile, Voldemort, Peter Dutton, the bald, cashiered Queensland cop who was in the force back in the days when Queensland police had the highest deaths in custody rate of any police force in the Commonwealth of Nations. He who, when a Cyclone Alfred was forecast to come and dump a couple of metres of rain on his electorate, pre-reported a there, chaps, chin up, she'll be right, stiff up a lip and all that, you know, like, we can cope with it, it's only a cyclone. And fucked off and went away to Sydney to a fundraising gathering. This comes only about a week or 10 days after it's been revealed that back when the global financial crisis was on, when he was in opposition, he was invited to a meeting with a finance minister and he was briefed on the intentions of the government in order to boost the economy and prevent the global recession from smacking Australia. The next day he went out and he bought a whole lot of shares in companies that he knew were going to do very well out of the anti-recession moves. And then the day after that the moves were announced and his shares went up, and I think he netted several $1 million on that deal, which is known in the trade as insider trading. So just at the moment, Australia is due for an election. The date of the election was going to be announced last week. However, due to Cyclone Alfred, 86% of the battery remaining coming into town, that's not bad. Yep, 4 o'clock, missed the red top. What was I saying? Yeah, they were going to announce the bloody election last week. Didn't happen. But there is an election due. And the longer they wait to announce it, the less leeway there is in when it's going to be. So I'd say we're going to have ourselves an election probably May. And Voldemort, Peter Dutton, leader of the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Coalition, big friend of the rampant robber baron type capitalists, what he's been wanting to do, I suppose we'll just cruise around town till I get sick of talking, what he's been wanting to do is ride the coattails of Trumpism. He was suggesting that what Australia needs is a doge of its own, a dodgy doggy. Which strikes me as a particularly asinine, infantile, stupid bloody idea. But you've got to remember, over the past 40 years, the Liberal Party, every time they got into power, they have laid off swathes of public servants and replaced them with short-term, inexperienced contractors who had no fucking idea of what they were doing or why, but they knew they could get paid a hugely fat contract for telling the government to do whatever the government told the contractors they wanted to be advised to do. So it's kind of not surprising that the Liberal National Party is in favour of crippling the regulators and getting rid of all environmental regulation and getting rid of the anti-corruption watchdogs as well, because, you know, why would you want any of them? All of which, to my mind, is wildly bloody irritating. However, Voldemort looks like shit on a stick because it's going to be very, very difficult for him to decouple himself from Trumpism and the MAGA party, which is where he's been going and what he's been pushing. For as long as Trump's been in politics, really. The joke of Australian politics has always been that the Liberal Party, they just, bracket, defiably, question mark, close bracket, 46 kilometres an hour up this hill. They just want to be able to invest their money or employ people with no pesky red tape or regulations preventing them from doing whatever it is that they want to do in order to make money as fast as possible with as few checks and balances and responsibilities and barriers to their just raping the landscape and shitting in the water supply as possible. That's the idea of the Liberal Party. The National Party, their big reason for existence is to get superphosphate bounties and subsidies and tax breaks and waivers from environmental regulations so that they can, well, basically if it moves, shoot it. If it doesn't move, chop it down. If that doesn't work, try dynamite. And if dynamite makes no impression, maybe you can rent the friggin' thing out for advertising space. The loggers and the miners of the world. And then there's the Labor Party, which is the parliamentary wing of the union movement, formed in 1901 at the Federation of Australia. And their whole idea is they justifiably want to be able to work 40 hours a week, over 5 days a week, for a fair day's pay, for a fair day's wages, in a safe working environment with all protective equipment and tools provided. There's 4 weeks off paid holidays with a 17.5% loading, because you need to have more money when you're on holidays because you've got more time to spend it, and 2 weeks sick leave per year to accrue, long service leave after 10 years, and regular pay rises every year. That's, quote, all they want. Apparently the convention is you don't go near other cars when they are parking at the Martins Lookout. So, that's all the Labor Party want. They want to work for somebody who votes for the Liberal Party or the National Party. Then on the hairy little fringe of that, you got maybe 5 to 15% who want to vote Green. I'm one of them. And then there are the independents, starting with the Fishers, Shooters, Hooters, Rooters and Feral Pig Fuckers Party. And they want to do things like leave horses in the National Park, or be allowed to shoot horses in the National Park. They want to be able to shoot pigs recreationally in the National Park, and foxes and rabbits, and if that frightens the citizenry who want to go to the National Park and go quietly bushwalking, well, you know, tough luck for the citizenry. People should be allowed to have the same gun rights as anybody else in America, according to the pro-gun lobby in Australia, who have still got the shits that they're not allowed to have semi-automatic long arms. Then there's Pauline Pants Down, the extreme populist, low IQ courting, low education courting fish and chip shop owner, who used to be a Liberal candidate till she was dropped from pre-selection because she was too racist for the Liberal Party. But back in those days, she was only after Aborigines and Asians. After the 2001 mystery kamikaze buildings falling down, she became deeply, deeply, deeply Islamophobic. Lunatics for whom the National Party wasn't radical enough, like Bob Catter and his son in North Queensland. And there's Jackie Lambie, who's a little bit of an Aborigine, but she's otherwise a sort of suburban, right-wing, veteran ex-military police member of Parliament, federal member of Parliament from Tasmania. bit of a loudmouth lunatic in my opinion, but she's got her following. And on the state level, there's a bunch of people who are called or styled or style themselves the teal, because that's apparently a colour reminiscent of a duck, I suppose. And these teals used to be liberals, but they're educated enough to recognise that global warming is a problem, it is a thing, it's happening, it's not a hoax. You can't blame it on the Chinese, and trying to ignore it just means that you get further into a really difficult bloody hole. So the teals have done some major advances in both Sydney and Melbourne. I don't know how they're going in Brisbane, but the teals seem to be attracting all of the votes that are leaking away from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, people who haven't quite gone green yet. And they're not interested in the fishers, shooters, hooters and feral pig rooters party. Look at that, Margaret Street. At this 90-degree bend down here, it turns into William Street. When I was a kid, my best mate's father set fire to that house. His wife drove him mad, and every time she put him in the bloody lunatic asylum, she transferred more of his assets into her name to stop the masters of lunacy from pinching it. And that house there is the one I grew up in. Those front steps you briefly saw were the ones I fell down when I was 18 months old, trying to run away from home. Twice. 3 days apart. I didn't like living there. It's a different treescape, but yeah. And there's a median strip at the bottom of William Street Hill, but I used to ride my size 20-inch push bike down here when I was 6 years old and ride the bloody school. Back when there was no median strip here. The cop used to sit there in his little bloody mini miner, and if someone come past here speeding, he'd clutch start in second gear going down the hill and roll around the corner, whether he was going right or left with his siren going. Back in the days when highway patrol traffic speed cops used to get around in bloody mini miners. So yeah, hopefully Australia's going to take a bit of a bloody jump to the green, especially as all the dickheads who think it's a clever idea to have a real estate boom on a floodplain where the dairy farms all went broke in the droughts on the outskirts of the towns and cities on low-lying areas. They all lost their beaches and got washed away all along the bloody Queensland coast last weekend. Bunches of them still haven't got any electricities. Or mobile phones, or a lot of computer connections. Somebody's workshop closed. I think he does fire brigade lectures on Wednesday afternoons. So anyway, that's the Trumpocalypse Chronicle number 11 in the new Marlon Brando fantasy, highly pretentious, creaky leather jacket. 21 kilometres, 38, 39, 34 minutes, average speed 37, 51 max, 78% of the battery remaining. There you go, now you know. That's what I think about the Trumpocalypse. Warbles on like the issue. Ciao.